All right, guys, today we're going to be taking a look at an intermittent crank no start on this 2.2 Ecotec sitting inside this 2004 Cavalier. So in order to get an engine started, you got to have air coming through here. You got to have spark, which is coming through your ignition coil here and into your spark plugs, and you got to have fuel coming up through here. So when we have this kind of problem, we'd end up usually having to look at all three, but we've got an extra clue today. This is a really, really bad smell of fuel. There's a really bad gasoline smell. So we can skip the air and we can skip the spark. We've got a fuel problem, an intermittent fuel pressure type problem. So that's what we're going to be chasing. All right, guys, so we're just going to be using the factory service manual for 04 for the Cavalier and Sunfire with this engine. And we're going to be going through the fuel system diagnosis section of the service manual, because what we're interested in finding out here is where we might have this leak. Now, this is what you do if you don't have an obvious sign of a leak, right? So an obvious sign of a leak would be, if we take our light here, we might go take a look at where the fuel line is coming in. Let me just get this manual where it's not going to walk on us. We might take a look at these fuel lines that are coming in, both the inlet and the return. We might look and see, do we see any evidence of leaking, which we don't. We might look and see, do we have evidence of leaking at the service port where you would plug in your fuel pressure gauge, and we don't see any evidence of leaking there. We can follow these lines on down and see, do we see leaking at this flex hose area, which we've already inspected. There's no leaks there. There's no leaks here coming into the fuel rail. No leaks coming into or around the fuel pressure regulator. If we were to go down and look at each of the injectors, if we don't see any signs of obvious fuel leaking, then we're going to have to go more to this service manual procedure. Another thing that you might see is fuel dripping out of this vacuum hose here at the regulator, but we don't see that either. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not a problem with the regulator, right? So that's why you have checks like this. And so this particular test, what it has you do is coming in here, putting the key on with the engine off, and we're going to be using a scan tool to turn the fuel pump relay on. We're going to give it a shot without the scan tool initially, but usually you need to get this relay on to get the pressure up where you want. We're going to put a fuel pressure gauge onto that port that I just showed you, and then we're going to test that we're getting, without the engine running, we're going to test that we're getting between 50 and 60 psi. That's our first test. So let's go ahead and get our pressure gauge on and get started with that. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and put our fuel pressure gauge on here. Have yourself some rags, because there could be some excess fuel pressure. Take our service cap off again. So that we're not going to lose it. We're going to be using an OTC fuel pressure gauge. I like this kind where you have a relief valve on it. We're actually going to need that as part of this procedure after we do this test. Whoops. Whoops. Didn't have it threaded all the way. Now we got it threaded all the way. Okay. Just going to sit that maybe right here. Try to get it somewhere where you can see it. There we go. All right. I'm sure the light is getting some glare on it. We'll move that in just a minute. And then we're going to run this drain into some suitable container outside the vehicle. All right, so we're going to get going on that service manual procedure. We've got our Tech 2 scan tool out here as well, and we're going to build the vehicle. So zoom in here a bit. We can see we're going to do a passenger car from 2004. It's a Chevrolet. It's a J-body. It's a Cavalier. And we're going to be going into the powertrain, and we're going to be doing the regular 2.2 with an automatic. And what I'm interested in here are special functions, fuel system, and, well, nope, sorry about that. Where did they hide this guy? fuel pump. All right. So now I'm going to have to turn the key so the scan tool can communicate with the powertrain control module. All right, guys, this was a short test. I went to check this before we filmed the clip, and I can already see the leak. So I'm just going to jump through and show you where it is, right? I already pulled the gauge off. We will not need it, although I'll tell you afterwards what this procedure was in case you don't have it this easy. But look, we're going to come over here to the scan tool. Move it a little bit so we do not have any glare. And we're going to command the fuel pump on using the Tech 2. Fuel pump's running. And then the problem that we noticed was we can see that we're getting fuel leaking right out of this vacuum line. So the problem we've got here is a fuel pressure regulator is shot. That's what's going on here, right? So you can see the fuel's just pouring out of this thing. This guy is where the fuel is leaking. So that's why there was nothing obvious to see. What was happening is after the person would shut the engine off, this would quickly evaporate and dry up because it's not a bad leak. But if you get this guy to stay on longer than a key on engine off sequence with the scan tool, then you can see it. Let's go ahead and swap the part out, and then let's return to the service manual and go through why that diagnostic would have found this also if it wasn't this bad. All right, so to get this guy off, we're going to want to, we would normally want to reduce the fuel pressure, and we can do that either by hooking the gauge back up and hitting the button, or the fact that we've got a leak, it's going to bleed off anyway. We're going to need a 24 millimeter to get this big nut here off, and we're going to need a T30 Torx bit on our ratchet to eventually get this off. So we're first going to work on this, and to let that guy start going, just in case he's going to be difficult, we're going to put a little penetrating fluid on here, let some of that work into the threads. I'm going to go get a couple of wrenches, and we're going to go ahead and remove this and remove this. All right, guys, we're going to, you can see, besides the nut here with the flats, the regulator itself has a few flats on it. So we should be able to get a couple of wrenches on here to get this off. We've removed the fuel pressure. All right. So we've broken the torque on this nut here. Just going to work him off. Now, even though we've taken the pressure out, there still could be some residual fuel. So just to prevent having a big mess, put some rags in here. Yeah, get it under there. There we go. All right, so we got this off out of the way. We're going to go ahead and pull this vacuum line off this end out of the way and pull it back up and over. And now we're going to take that T30 bit and we're going to break the torque on that. Now this kind of stuff I like to do loose and tighten because the last thing I want is this to break off inside the engine. It's old and corroded. So I want to get a couple of turns on that so that it's a little loose. Then we're going to put some penetrating oil on the bottom of this as well. It takes a little longer, guys, but let me tell you, whenever these things break, it takes a lot longer. The problem is just that the thickness of this particular fastener is very small. And we got dissimilar metals going on here, right? As soon as we get this guy worked out, and hopefully you guys can see this. I don't know if I'm blocking your view or not. Maybe we can move the camera where the view is not blocked. She seems to be coming out pretty easy now. She was very, very high resistance initially, which caused me to get concerned about breakage. Always concerned about breakage. Now we're going to toss this bolt anyway. When you put the new ones on, you have to replace this particular type of fastener anyway. All right, so now we've got a couple of things. We've got to get this fuel line out of here, and we've got to get this guy off the fuel rail. So I'm going to get a little prizing tool so that we can do the latter first, and then the former should come pretty quick after that. All right, and again, trying to cut down on the mess because, look, after we do all this, we want to check for leaks. And the more we keep this clean now, the easier job it's going to be later when we replace it to tell if we got any leaks. Just got to remember, this guy has not been out of here since this vehicle was assembled back in 2004. So he is going to fight you. Trying to find a better place for me to prize. Let me pause the camera a second, look around in here, and found a better position. All right, guys, I found the sweet spot is right in here, and we get that up enough, we can get another tool under the bracket, and with this guy under the bracket, we should be able to claim victory here. Should. Again, this is one of those kind of things where you want to go slow and easy. This is all that's holding it, is where it has been pulled into the fuel rail by this T30. I'm going to go ahead and get this guy completely out of our way. He's going to end up having to be discarded as well because he's been damaged. I'm going to keep working with him, and I'll keep checking in with you guys to show our progress. All right, guys, eventually we got her to lift. Again, you got to keep these cables out of the way. In fact, we can maybe slide this guy out of the way a little bit as well. At this point, we've got her out. Got her separated. All right, so there's our old regulator. Nice and rusty. And there's our fuel gurgling away down there. I don't like some of the debris that we've got hanging around there, so I'm going to try and clean this up as well. So let me clean this up and we'll come back. All right, guys, we're going to be replacing that regulator with this part here, which is an AC Delco 125-74339. This is a new regulator kit. What this will include is the new T30 bolt with the Loctite fastener already on it, and our new regulator. It will also include the new O-ring. It's going to go on the fuel rail, as well as inside here there's a new O-ring. So what we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to get some clean fuel from inside here, and we're going to lubricate this O-ring. And then we're also going to lubricate the one that's in here. At the same time I'm getting this fuel to do this lubrication, I'm working some of this fuel out of this bore so that it doesn't overflow anyway. There's still a little bit too much in there, so we're going to soak some of it up with this rag so that when we push this in, we don't get a lot of resistance. All right, so we're first going to work this guy on. And then we'll line up the bottom one. If you come down here, you probably have a better view. That one's in. And now we got to get this guy pushed down. That one's in. And now we're going to take our new T30 out of the bag. Starting by hand. And then just grab a regular ratchet first. We'll torque him down in just a second. He'll start off easy and then he'll get a little hard as that factory thread locker hits. Just want to go down till you see that it's seated, and then we'll do the rest of the way with a torque wrench. Now we're going to bring this guy back over. We're going to torque him as well. But for now, we're just going to get him on. Don't have a 24 millimeter flare wrench, so that's why we're using this guy. And again, we're just going to snug this guy up to get started. All right, so now we've got a new fastener, and I also mentioned that we're going to have to toss that All right, guys, so just had to keep turning and turning and turning, and now we're at the last stage. Turns out there actually is no torque value on this big nut, so you just want to make sure he's nice and snug. So just hand tighten, snug, I'll do it. 89 inch-pounds on this little T30. I'll show you that in the service manual in just a second here. Now, I mentioned before that we're going to have to replace this guy, and the reason is the plastic, the hard part of the plastic of this line is probably okay, but the rubber part is going to be attacked and broken down by the gasoline. You can see there's already a crack developing at this end as well. There's already a crack developing at this end. And this piece here is already working its way loose, right? So it's already been damaged. So we're just going to replace that because of the leak with a part number 12568592. And that is a replacement one of these lines, still made by GM, probably for this exact reason. Just hook this guy down here, nice and snug. And then hook him up here. Nice and snug. Put this guy back under there the way he was. Push that down. And this repair is done. So now what do we got to do? Well, we're going to have to check for leaks, and then we're going to go back to the service manual and show what we were going to do before we ran into this lucky find. So let me go turn the key on the ignition and get our Tech 2 fire back up. We'll check for leaks, then we'll move over to the service manual. All right, guys, we're back at our same spot in the Tech 2, and we're ready to turn the fuel pump on. Just going to move the camera over to my left here for a moment so I can get some clean rags. And then we will give this a leak test. And before I forget, I'm going to put the cap back on the service port that we took our gauge off of. All right, I'm going to command the fuel pump on the Tech 2. You can hear it running now. And then what we're looking for is, any evidence of anything leaking. I can't let it run too long here. But I'm not seeing any leaks at all, nothing coming from below either. All right, so I'm going to shut this off, right? Now, so you could lubricate. I want to make a tip I mentioned before about the gasoline lubrication. You could also lubricate that with a light motor oil if you chose. The point is to get both O-rings lubricated. So snug here, 89 inch-pounds here. If you've got the leak through the vacuum hose, replace the vacuum hose because it's been damaged, and that's exactly why they make a replacement vacuum hose. So let's take a look at the service manual on where we were going with this repair initially. All right, guys, just to wrap up here, so here's your 89 inch-pounds or 10 newton-meters of torque for the fuel pressure regulator retaining bolt, which is the guy that we had included in the kit. They mentioned about reconnecting the vacuum pipe up. We actually replaced it, and then inspecting for leaks, key on, key off for 10 seconds, turn on the ignition, expect for leaks. So, okay, we've done this. We don't have any, so we're good to go here. So where were we going before we had this stroke of luck in discovering this problem. So we started off over here, and we were on this fuel system diagnosis. And what we were going to do is we were going to go verify that we had 50 to 60 psi. We did, because that would have been an indication of a different problem if we had 0 or far lower. And what it was asking is it within the specified range? And the answer was going to be yes. And we were then going to go to this test, which was to go ahead and monitor the fuel pressure gauge for 1 minute and see if it decreases after the pump is turned off by more than 5 psi, right? If it did, it was going to take us to step 7. And if we went to step 7, it was going to tell us to remove the hose from the fuel pressure regulator, turn on the ignition with the engine off, command the fuel pump relay back on with the Tech 2, and inspect for a fuel leak from the fuel pressure regulator port. And was it leaking fuel? Yes, it was. Go to step 19. Check for any damaged or missing O-ring seals. Replace the fuel pressure regulator. So that's exactly where we ended up. We just ended up short-circuiting this diagnostic because it was so badly leaking that we didn't even have to complete this last test here where they asked us to monitor the pressure going down over a period of 60 seconds. So if you happen to have an intermittent crank no start problem on a 2.2 Ecotec and you've got a fuel smell under the hood, then my suggestion would be to start with the procedure I just showed you and look for a fuel leak problem, because that smell is a dead giveaway. Most of the time, it's going to be this guy right here, but it doesn't always have to be this guy. It could be a leak at the Schrader valve of the service port. That's fairly easy to spot. It could be a leak in this braided part of the fuel line, although that's pretty rare in my experience. Or it could be a leak at one of the fuel injectors, which doesn't necessarily have to be visible, but if it's not happening externally, you shouldn't be smelling the fuel that strongly. What other things we're going to do, we're not going to do on the film here. I'm going to go ahead and take these 2 clamps off, the one here and the one over here, and we're just going to make sure that we don't have any internal damage from the fuel leaking. We're also going to inspect this sensor here just to make sure there's no damage from the fuel leaking, just to do due diligence. I think everything's fine because the car did not throw any codes, but just to point that out, if you have the same problem, you may want to do the same. Anyway, I hope this video has helped you out in finding this kind of a problem on your 2.2 Ecotec. This particular arrangement with the regulator up top here and the fuel rail in the front is found on the 2003 to 2005 models like Cavalier from Chevrolet or Sunfire from Pontiac, for example. If you've got a question, go ahead and leave it below. I'll try to help out. If this did save you some time or money, or you just found it interesting, please hit that like button. It helps with discovery of the video. And as always, thanks for watching.